At our anniversary dinner, my husband's best friend raised his glass and said, "Here's to another year with the temporary one." The entire restaurant table went quiet, including my husband David, who just kept cutting his steak like nothing happened. "What did you just call me?" I set down my wine glass and stared at David's best friend Lucas, who was smiling like he'd made a normal toast instead of insulting me in front of 12 people. "The temporary one? That's what we call you at poker night. David knows you're just a placeholder until Natalie comes back from Japan." He said it so casually, like he was discussing the weather. Natalie was David's ex-fiancée who'd broken up with him 4 years ago to take a job in Tokyo. We'd been married for 3 years. "David, what is he talking about?" My husband finally looked up, but he was looking at Lucas, not me. "You weren't supposed to mention that here." Not that it wasn't true, just that Lucas wasn't supposed to mention it here. At our anniversary dinner, that I'd planned for weeks. Lucas laughed and took another sip of the wine I'd specially ordered. "Come on, David, everyone knows. You still have her picture in your office. You still wear the watch she gave you. You check her social media every morning before you even say good morning to the temporary one." He gestured at me like I was a piece of furniture. "Her name is Jennifer. We're married." I held up my wedding ring, but Lucas waved his hand dismissively. "Yeah, but that's just paperwork. David only married you because Natalie's parents said she'd never come back if he was still single and pathetic. They thought he needed to move on. But she's coming back next month, and we all know what happens then." My sister, who'd come to celebrate with us, pushed back her chair. "What do you mean she's coming back?" Lucas pulled out his phone and showed a message thread. "Natalie's been texting the group chat. She got transferred back to the Dallas office. Starts in 3 weeks. David's already been apartment hunting for her." I turned to my husband, who was now glaring at Lucas. "You've been helping your ex find an apartment?" David shrugged. "She doesn't know the city anymore." "It's been 4 years. I was just being helpful." Lucas laughed louder. "Helpful? You put a deposit down on the place 2 blocks from your office, the one with the connecting balconies to the unit next door. Guess who just happened to sign a lease for that unit last week?" He pointed at David. "But I'm sure that's just a coincidence, right?" My mother-in-law, who'd been silent until now, finally spoke up. "David would never leave Jennifer for that woman." But she said it to Lucas, not to me, and her voice sounded hopeful, not confident. Lucas kept going. "David's been saving money in a separate account, $40,000. He calls it his emergency fund, but we all know it's for when Natalie comes back. She always said she wanted a fancy proposal the second time around, with a bigger ring and a flash mob and all that garbage." He showed another message on his phone. "Look, she even sent him ring options last month." The screen showed a conversation between David and Natalie about diamond cuts and settings. My husband grabbed for the phone, but Lucas pulled it away. "Don't act shy now. You're the one who asked me to help you plan the proposal, though I told you proposing while still married might be awkward." He turned to me with fake concern. "No offense to you, temporary one, but Natalie's his soulmate. You're just the girl who was there when he was lonely." I stood up to leave, but Lucas wasn't done. "Wait, you should know the whole truth. David never even canceled their wedding venue. He's been paying them $50 a month to hold the date for when she comes back. October 15th. Same date they were supposed to get married 4 years ago. He even kept the same menu and flowers on order." David finally spoke, but not to defend me. "Lucas, you're drunk. Stop talking." Lucas shook his head. "I'm perfectly sober. Sober enough to remember you made me promise to help you win Natalie back when she returned. You said Jennifer was nice enough, but she wasn't the one. You said marrying her was like buying a starter home, good enough for now, but you'd upgrade when you could afford better." My sister grabbed my arm. "We're leaving." But I needed to hear more. "What else did he say about our marriage?" Lucas looked genuinely confused. "You want details?" "Okay. He said you're too quiet. Natalie was exciting. You're too short. Natalie was model height. You don't challenge him. Natalie pushed him to be better. You're comfortable. Natalie was passion. Should I continue?" David stood up. "That's enough, Lucas." Lucas stood too, getting in David's face. "No, what's enough is you stringing along this poor woman for 3 years. I told you to just stay single and wait for Natalie, but you said you needed someone to do your laundry and cook your meals while you waited. That's messed up even for you." He turned back to me. I grabbed my purse and pushed back from the table, the chair legs scraping loud against the restaurant floor. Everyone at the table froze and stared at me like I'd just announced I was going to flip the whole thing over. My sister stood up at the same time and put her hand on my arm, her grip tight and steady. David finally looked directly at me instead of at Lucas or his steak, and his face had this weird blank expression like he couldn't decide if he was panicking or just annoyed that Lucas had messed up his careful timeline. His mouth opened like he was going to say something, but nothing came out. I turned to walk toward the exit, and Lucas actually reached across the table for my wrist. His fingers wrapped around my arm, and I yanked it back so hard I almost knocked over the wine bottle. He had this fake concerned look on his face now, like he hadn't just spent 10 minutes destroying my marriage in front of everyone I cared about. Lucas said he didn't mean to upset me. He just thought I should know the truth before Natalie got back in 3 weeks. Like that made it better. Like timing was the problem here and not the fact that my entire marriage was a lie. I pulled my arm away from him and told him the only honest thing he'd done in 3 years was tell me what everyone really thought of my marriage. My voice came out louder than I meant it to, and the tables around us went quiet. The waiter who'd been heading toward our table with dessert menus turned around and walked the other way. My mother-in-law made this small gasping sound, but she didn't say anything to defend me or tell Lucas he was wrong. Nobody did. David just sat there with his hands flat on the table like he was waiting for this whole scene to be over so he could go back to his steak and his secret plans. My sister grabbed her purse and mine and steered me toward the door. I could feel everyone watching us leave. The other diners, the staff, all 12 people at our anniversary table. My feet felt weird and disconnected from my body, but I kept walking. When we got outside, the cool air hit my face and I realized I'd been holding my breath. My sister asked if I was okay to walk to the car, and I nodded even though I wasn't sure. The parking lot lights were too bright and everything felt surreal, like I was watching this happen to someone else. She unlocked her car and I got in the passenger seat. My hands were shaking so hard I couldn't get the seatbelt buckled on the first try. My sister started driving without asking where I wanted to go. She just headed toward the house I shared with David like that was the obvious next step. I stared out the window at the streetlights going past and tried to process what had just happened. 3 years. I'd been married to David for 3 years, and the whole time he'd been calling me temporary. The whole time his friends had been laughing about it at poker night. The whole time he'd been planning for Natalie to come back like I was just keeping his bed warm until the real thing showed up. My sister kept one hand on my shoulder during the drive and didn't try to make me talk. The 20-minute drive felt like it took hours, and also like it was over in seconds. When we pulled into the driveway, I got out before she'd even turned off the engine. I walked straight to the front door and unlocked it with hands that were still shaking. The house looked exactly the same as when I'd left it 3 hours ago to go to our anniversary dinner. The dinner I'd planned for weeks. The dinner where I'd made reservations at David's favorite restaurant and ordered his favorite wine and invited all the people he wanted there. I walked past the living room and down the hall to David's home office. I rarely went in there because he always said he needed privacy for work calls. Now I wondered what he was really doing in here with the door locked. My sister followed me into the office and watched as I started pulling open desk drawers. The top drawer had pens and sticky notes and paper clips. Normal office stuff. The second drawer had folders labeled with work project names. I pulled them out and flipped through them, but they were just boring work documents about quarterly reports and budget meetings. The third drawer was locked. I yanked on it, but it didn't budge. My sister asked if I had a key, and I shook my head. She looked around the office and found a letter opener on the desk. I took it from her and jammed it into the gap between the drawer and the desk frame. The cheap lock popped open after a few seconds of prying. Inside the bottom drawer was a single folder labeled Future Plans in David's neat handwriting. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. I pulled the folder out and set it on the desk. The first page was a printed email from Natalie dated 18 months ago. 18 months. She'd been planning her return for over a year, and David had been helping her the whole time. The email was about job applications and which Dallas companies were hiring in her field. David had responded with a list of recommendations and offered to put in a good word at several places. The tone was casual and friendly, but also something more. There was this familiarity that made my chest tight. I flipped to the next page and found another email where Natalie asked David to look at apartment listings for her. He'd responded with links to places near his office and made notes about which neighborhoods were good. I kept reading and the emails got worse. They weren't just planning her move. They were planning their future together. Natalie called him babe in half the messages. David responded with inside jokes I didn't understand, references to things they'd done together before she left. There were emails about restaurants they wanted to try when she got back. Plans to visit the lake house where they'd gotten engaged the first time. Discussions about whether they should have a big wedding or something small and intimate. My sister was reading over my shoulder and I could hear her breathing getting faster. She kept making these small, shocked sounds under her breath. The emails were so casual and warm and affectionate. Reading them felt like watching David have an entire relationship that had nothing to do with me. In one message, Natalie wrote about missing him and counting down the days until she could come home. David wrote back that he'd been waiting for her and that everything would be perfect when she returned. No mention of his wife. No mention of the woman he'd been living with and sleeping next to for 3 years. I was just this obstacle he had to work around until Natalie came back. My sister reached past me and pulled out another page from the middle of the folder. She held it up and said, "Oh my God," so loud it made me jump. The email had photos attached. 4 different engagement rings. Huge diamonds in different settings. The subject line said, "Round 2 better be perfect." Natalie had sent David pictures of rings she liked and asked which one he thought would look best on her hand. David had responded with detailed thoughts about each ring and promised the proposal would be everything she'd dreamed of. He even included a budget breakdown showing he had enough saved to afford the most expensive option. $40,000. The emergency fund that wasn't for emergencies at all. I sat down hard in David's desk chair because my legs wouldn't hold me up anymore. My sister kept flipping through the folder and finding more evidence. Receipts for the apartment deposits Lucas had mentioned. Bank statements showing monthly transfers to the secret account. A printed lease agreement for 2 units in the same building with connecting balconies. David's signature was on both leases. A confirmation email from the wedding venue thanking him for his continued monthly payments, and confirming the October 15th date was still reserved. The venue coordinator had written that they were excited to finally see his wedding happen after 4 years of waiting. 4 years. He'd been paying them the whole time we were together. My sister and I sat in that office reading through everything for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes. Every document confirmed what Lucas had said. Every email made it worse. This wasn't just David staying friendly with an ex. This was David maintaining a whole relationship while pretending to be married to me. This was David treating our marriage like a temporary job he had to do until his real life could start. I thought about all the times he'd been distant or distracted. All the times he'd said he was working late. All the mornings he checked his phone before saying good morning to me. He'd been checking for messages from Natalie, counting down until she came back. We heard the front door open and both jumped. David's voice called out asking if I was home. My sister looked at me and mouthed asking if I wanted to leave, but I shook my head. I needed to hear him try to explain this. I needed to watch his face while he told me whatever lies he'd prepared on the drive home from the restaurant. David's footsteps came down the hall and stopped in the office doorway. He looked at me sitting in his chair, then at my sister standing next to the desk, then at the open folder with papers spread everywhere. His face went completely blank. Not surprised or guilty or angry, just blank. Like he was a computer that had crashed and was trying to reboot and figure out what expression to show. I asked him if anything Lucas said tonight was untrue. My voice sounded weird and flat, like I was asking about the weather instead of asking if my marriage was real. David stood in the doorway for a long moment without moving. Then he walked into the office and sat down heavily in the chair across from his desk. The chair where clients or coworkers probably sat during meetings. He looked at the folder and all the papers, and then finally looked at me. He said yes, he'd been helping Natalie plan her return. Yes, he'd leased an apartment near his office for her. But he swore he was going to tell me before she actually arrived. He said it like that made it okay. Like the problem was that I found out too soon instead of the fact that he'd been planning to leave me this whole time. My sister asked him when exactly he was planning to tell me. Her voice was sharp and angry in a way I'd never heard before. David said he was waiting for the right time. He kept his eyes on the desk instead of looking at either of us. I started laughing and couldn't stop. The sound came out high and broken and not like my normal laugh at all. My sister put her hand on my shoulder, but I kept laughing. Apparently our 3-year anniversary dinner wasn't the right time. Apparently finding out from his drunk best friend in front of 12 people were fine, but David telling me himself would have required waiting for the perfect moment. I laughed until tears ran down my face and my sister squeezed my shoulder harder, and David just sat there looking at his desk, like maybe if he stared at it long enough this whole conversation would disappear. I stopped laughing and wiped my face with the back of my hand. David sat across from me in his office chair looking smaller than usual. He opened his mouth and closed it twice before words came out. He said he never meant to hurt me and that I'd been a good wife. The words landed wrong. Being called a good wife while he'd spent 3 years planning to replace me felt worse than being called temporary. It felt like getting a participation trophy for a game I didn't know I was playing. My sister made a sound in her throat that wasn't quite a laugh. David kept talking about how he appreciated everything I did for him, and how I shouldn't take any of this personally. I asked him how exactly I was supposed to take discovering my husband had been treating our marriage like a rental agreement. He didn't have an answer for that. I stood up and walked to the window looking out at our backyard where we'd hosted barbecues with friends who apparently all knew I was temporary. The grass needed mowing. David always said he'd do it on weekends, but he never did. I turned back to face him. I asked about the $40,000. David's face changed and he looked genuinely surprised that Lucas had told me about the money. His mouth opened, but nothing came out at first. Then he admitted it was true. He said he kept the money separate just in case. Just in case of what I asked. He shifted in his chair and said, just in case things changed. I asked about the wedding venue payments. He nodded slowly and said yes, he'd kept paying them. He looked at the desk instead of at me. I asked why, and he said he didn't know how to cancel it. That was his excuse. He didn't know how to cancel a wedding venue for a wedding that never happened because his fiancée left him 4 years ago. My sister stood up from where she'd been sitting and told David he needed to leave. He looked at her like she'd spoken a different language. She repeated it slower. She said he needed to get out of his own house for the night because if he stayed, she was going to say things that couldn't be taken back. David actually argued. He said it was his house too. He said he paid the mortgage. He said he had every right to be here. My sister looked at me and I must have looked like I was about to break because David stopped talking. He stared at my face for a long moment. Then he stood up and left the office without another word. I heard him moving around upstairs, drawers opening and closing, the closet door sliding on its track. My sister put her hand on my shoulder and asked if I was okay. I said I didn't know. We stood there listening to David pack. He came back downstairs around midnight carrying a duffel bag. He stopped in the office doorway and looked at me. He said we could talk about this rationally tomorrow when everyone had calmed down. He said this like I was the one being unreasonable. Like I was overreacting to finding out my husband had been counting down the days until he could replace me. I didn't say anything. I just looked at him standing there with his bag. He waited for me to respond, and when I didn't, he turned and walked to the front door. I heard it open and close. Then his car starting in the driveway. Then silence. My sister asked if I wanted her to stay, and I nodded. We went back to David's office and started going through everything. We pulled out every folder and opened every drawer. My sister took photos of documents with her phone. I read emails that made my stomach hurt. We found the lease agreement for both apartments in a folder marked personal. The apartments were 2 blocks from David's office with connecting balconies. The lease started next month. We found bank statements for the separate account. $40,000 exactly. Deposits every month for 3 years. We found a document titled Transition Planning that laid out how David would handle divorcing me. It had timelines and bullet points. It treated ending our marriage like a business project. There was a section about how to minimize my claim to joint assets. Another section about optimal timing for filing. My sister read it over my shoulder and said words I'd never heard her say before. We kept digging. We found emails between David and Natalie going back 2 years. Not 4 years. 2 years. Which meant he'd been talking to her for most of our marriage. The emails were full of inside jokes and memories from before I existed in his life. She sent him photos from Tokyo. He sent her photos of places in Dallas she used to love. They talked about restaurants they'd go to when she got back, shows they'd see, trips they'd take. Like I wasn't even a factor. Like I was already gone. We found the contract with the wedding venue. David had been paying them $50 a month to hold October 15th. The same menu they'd planned 4 years ago. The same flowers. The same everything. He'd kept their entire wedding frozen in time waiting for her to come back. My sister and I worked until 3 a.m. We made copies of everything. We organized it into folders. She labeled them with her neat handwriting. Evidence, financial, communications, timeline. By the time we finished, the sun was starting to come up. I felt hollowed out. Like someone had scooped out my insides and left just the shell. My sister made coffee and we sat at the kitchen table not talking. The house felt different now. It didn't feel like mine anymore. Maybe it never had been. The next morning I called my boss. My voice kept breaking while I explained I needed a personal week. I said there was a family emergency. She asked if everything was okay, and I said it would be. That felt like a lie, but I said it anyway. She told me to take the time I needed and not to worry about work. An hour later, my phone rang. It was Saki from work. She said my boss mentioned I sounded upset. I tried to explain and ended up crying so hard I couldn't get words out. Saki waited on the line until I could breathe again. Then I told her everything. The anniversary dinner, Lucas, the temporary one, the apartments, the money, the wedding venue, the emails, all of it. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said I could stay at her place for as long as I needed. She said she and Dominic had a guest room and I should pack a bag and come over today. I started packing right after we hung up. My sister helped me sort through the closet, figuring out what was mine versus what David had bought me. She made lists. She took photos of everything in the house. She treated the whole thing like a military operation, which helped me focus on tasks instead of feelings. I pulled clothes off hangers and folded them into boxes. I packed shoes and jewelry and books. I took photos off the wall that my parents had given me. I left the wedding photos. David called 6 times that morning. I watched my phone light up with his name and didn't answer. He finally sent a text. It said we needed to discuss this like adults. It said he thought I was overreacting. I took a screenshot and sent it to my sister. She responded with angry face emojis. Then she texted back asking if David actually thought finding out about his secret divorce plan was an overreaction. I didn't have an answer. At noon, Saki and Dominic showed up with their SUV. Dominic took one look at my face and gave me a hug without saying anything. Then he started loading boxes. He and my sister worked together carrying stuff down the stairs. Saki stayed with me in the bedroom helping me pack the last of my things. She asked if I was sure I wanted to leave and I said I'd never been more sure of anything. Having people who just helped without needing explanations made me cry again. Saki handed me tissues and kept folding clothes. Dominic made 3 trips to the car. My sister labeled every box. We worked together like a team, and by 1 p.m, everything I owned was loaded in their SUV. We're almost done loading the last box when David's car pulls into the driveway. The engine cuts off and I freeze with my hand on the SUV door. My sister stops mid-step carrying a bag of my shoes. Dominic keeps walking toward the car like nothing's wrong, but I can see his shoulders tense up. David gets out and stares at the loaded vehicle and all my stuff packed inside. His face goes through about 5 different expressions before settling on shocked. He walks toward me with his keys still in his hand. Where are you going? I close the SUV door and turn to face him. Somewhere I'm not considered temporary. His mouth opens, but nothing comes out for a second. He looks at the boxes and bags and then back at me. You can't just leave. We need to talk about this. Dominic comes back for the last box sitting on the porch. It's the one with my books and photo albums. David moves to block him from picking it up. We need to talk about this before she makes any rash decisions. Dominic sets down the box he was carrying from the house and looks at David. His voice stays completely calm, but there's something underneath it that makes the hair on my arms stand up. Step aside. David doesn't move at first. He's taller than Dominic, but Dominic has this look on his face that says he's done being polite. I said step aside. David moves. He actually steps back and lets Dominic pick up the box. I watch my husband back down from another man in our own driveway and feel absolutely nothing. Dominic loads the final box and closes the SUV hatch. My sister gets in the driver's seat and starts the engine. I'm about to get in when I realize I need to ask him something. I turn back to David, who's standing there looking lost. Did you ever actually love me, or was I just convenient? He opens his mouth right away like he's going to say, of course he loved me. But then he stops. He looks at me and I can see him trying to figure out what answer will make this better. The seconds stretch out. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15. My sister leans out the window. Jennifer, we need to go. David finally speaks, but I'm already climbing into the SUV. My sister pulls out of the driveway before I can hear whatever excuse he's about to make. I don't look back at the house. I don't look at David standing in the driveway. I just watch the street ahead of us and try to remember how to breathe. Saki's downtown loft takes up the entire top floor of an old converted warehouse. The guest room is bigger than the bedroom I shared with David. It has huge windows that look out over the city and exposed brick walls and hardwood floors that shine in the afternoon light. Saki and Dominic bring up my boxes while I stand in the middle of the room trying to process that this is where I live now. They set up my stuff without asking me where things should go. Saki hangs my clothes in the closet. Dominic puts my books on the built-in shelves. My sister makes the bed with sheets Saki pulled from a linen closet that's bigger than my old bathroom. When everything is unpacked, they leave me alone. The door closes and I'm standing in this beautiful room that doesn't feel like mine. I lie down on the bed and stare at the ceiling. The paint has a texture pattern that looks like waves. I follow the lines with my eyes and try to figure out who I am without David. I was Jennifer, who worked in marketing and liked coffee with too much cream. Then I became Jennifer, who was married to David. Now I'm Jennifer, who got left for an ex-fiancé, except David hasn't actually left me yet, because the ex-fiancé hasn't arrived yet. I'm Jennifer, who found out at her anniversary dinner that her husband calls her temporary. I close my eyes, but I can still see Lucas's face when he said it. That casual smile like he was commenting on the weather. I can see David cutting his steak and not looking at me. I can see the ring on my finger that suddenly felt like it weighed nothing at all. That evening, Saki knocks on the door and brings in a plate of food. Pasta with vegetables and chicken. It smells good, but my stomach feels like it's been replaced with concrete. She sits on the edge of the bed while I pick at a piece of chicken. My first marriage ended badly, too. I look up at her. I didn't know Saki had been married before Dominic. She's always seemed so put together and happy. He cheated with my sister. Found out when I came home early from a work trip. I set down my fork. That's horrible. She shrugs. It was 10 years ago. Feels like a different lifetime now. She watches me push pasta around on my plate. The person you are right now, completely broken, isn't the person you'll be in 6 months. I promise you that. I want to believe her, but I can't imagine feeling normal again. I can't imagine waking up and not immediately remembering that my husband has been planning to leave me since before we even got married. How did you get through it? Saki thinks for a minute. I let myself fall apart for a while. Then I started putting myself back together piece by piece. Some days I could only manage one piece. Some days I couldn't manage any pieces at all. But eventually I had enough pieces back together that I could function again. She stands up and takes my plate even though I've barely eaten anything. You don't have to be okay right now. You just have to survive today. Tomorrow, you can survive tomorrow. The next morning, I call Miles Carver. My sister found him through someone she went to law school with. His assistant answers, and I explain that I need a divorce attorney. She asks if I can come in today. And I almost laugh because yes, I can definitely come in today since I took the entire week off work. But she says the earliest appointment is in 3 days. Wednesday at 2 in the afternoon. I write it down even though I know I'll remember. 3 days feels like forever, but also not nearly enough time to prepare for officially ending my marriage. I spend those 3 days going through my bank accounts on my laptop. David and I have a joint checking account and a joint savings account. I look at the balances and realize how much I've been depending on his salary. We put both our paychecks into the joint account, but his is almost double mine. The savings account has $42,000 in it. I contributed maybe $12,000 of that over 3 years. The rest is David's money. Money he earned while planning to leave me. I open my own accounts and see my retirement fund and the small savings account I had before we got married. I have maybe $8,000 that's completely mine. It's not nothing, but it's not enough to start over. I feel sick looking at the numbers. I never thought about what it meant to make less money than David. I never thought about what would happen if we split up and I had to support myself on just my salary. I was stupid. I trusted him completely, and that was stupid. My sister comes over on Tuesday morning. We drive to a bank downtown that's not the one David and I use. The woman who helps us open my new account is maybe 60 with reading glasses on a chain. She doesn't ask why I'm opening a solo account when I already have joint accounts. She just processes the paperwork and sets up my new checking and savings. My sister helps me calculate how much of our joint savings is actually mine. We figure out my contributions versus David's contributions. It comes out to about $14,000 when you factor in 3 years of deposits. I transfer $14,000 from our joint savings into my new savings account. The transaction takes less than 5 minutes. $14,000 moves from one account to another with a few clicks on the bank woman's computer. David calls me 2 hours later. I watch his name light up my phone screen. It rings 4 times before going to voicemail. He calls back immediately. This time I answer. You stole from me. I don't say anything. You took money out of our savings account. That's theft, Jennifer. I look at my sister who's sitting across from me at Saki's kitchen table. She nods. I took my portion of the savings. I contributed $14,000 over 3 years. That's what I transferred. David's voice gets louder. That money was for our future. You can't just take it because you're mad at me. I hang up. He calls back 3 more times. I block his number. My sister high-fives me across the table. It feels good to block him. It feels like taking back some tiny piece of control. Wednesday afternoon, I meet Miles Carver at his office in a building downtown. He's younger than I expected, maybe 40, with dark hair going gray at the temples. His office has floor-to-ceiling windows and modern furniture that looks expensive. I sit in a leather chair across from his desk and pull out the folder of documents I brought. Emails between David and Natalie, the lease agreements for both apartments, bank statements showing the secret account, the timeline David made for his transition planning. Miles goes through everything slowly. He makes notes on a legal pad. He asks questions about when I discovered each piece of information. He asks about our assets and debts. He asks if we have kids. No kids. No house. We rent. 2 cars both paid off. After an hour, he sets down his pen and looks at me. This is actually a fairly straightforward case. No children, no property, clear evidence of intent to end the marriage. He taps the folder. Texas is a no-fault divorce state, which means we don't need to prove wrongdoing to get you divorced. But this evidence will definitely help with property division. I feel something loosen in my chest. Straightforward. That's good. That means this can be over relatively quickly. Miles explains the process: filing the petition, serving David with papers, waiting periods, negotiation or mediation, possibly court if we can't agree on division of assets. He says most cases settle before going to trial. He says based on what I've shown him, I have a strong position for negotiating a fair settlement. Miles leans back in his chair and asks if I want to pursue anything regarding emotional distress or public humiliation. He mentions the anniversary dinner and how Lucas revealed everything in front of multiple witnesses. We could argue for additional compensation based on the intentional infliction of emotional distress. The fact that he humiliated you publicly in front of family and friends, that he deceived you for the entire marriage, that adds up. I think about it. I think about standing up in court and describing how Lucas called me temporary. I think about David's lawyer arguing that I'm exaggerating or being vindictive. I think about months of depositions and hearings and having to relive the worst night of my life over and over. I just want out. Miles nods. That's completely valid. A clean break is often better for your mental health than a prolonged legal battle. He makes another note. We'll focus on fair division of assets and getting this done as efficiently as possible. I sign the retainer agreement. Miles says he'll file the petition this week. He says David will be served with papers probably by next Monday. He says to expect David to contact me and to not engage with him directly. Everything should go through the lawyers now. I leave his office feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because I have a plan. Heavier because signing those papers made it real. I'm actually getting divorced. My marriage is actually ending. I walk back to my car and sit in the driver's seat for 10 minutes before I can make myself turn the key. I drive to Kalani Schwartz's office on Thursday morning and sit in the parking lot for 15 minutes trying to make myself go inside. The building is a converted house with a small sign that says counseling services. and I keep thinking about how I never imagined needing a therapist to help me survive my marriage ending. I finally walk up the steps, and a receptionist checks me in, then leads me to a small room with soft lighting and comfortable chairs. Kalani comes in a minute later, and she's younger than I expected, with kind eyes and a calm voice that makes me want to cry before she even says anything. She asks me to tell her what brought me here, and I start explaining about the anniversary dinner, and Lucas calling me temporary and finding all the evidence in David's office. Halfway through, I'm crying so hard I can barely talk, and Kalani just hands me tissues and waits patiently, while I try to pull myself together. She tells me everything I'm feeling is completely valid and normal, and that discovering your spouse has been planning to leave you for years is traumatic. Hearing her say the word traumatic makes me cry harder, because it feels like permission to fall apart. We spend the rest of the session with me crying, and her asking gentle questions about how I'm sleeping and eating, and whether I have support from friends and family. When the hour ends, she schedules me for twice a week and says we'll work through this together at whatever pace I need. The next session, Kalani asks me what I want my life to look like in 6 months, and I realize I have absolutely no idea. I sit there staring at her trying to come up with an answer, but my mind is completely blank. She asks what kind of apartment I want to live in, and I don't know. She asks what I like to do on weekends, and I can't remember. For 3 years, I built my life around David's schedule and preferences, and now I can't even remember what I enjoyed before I met him. Kalani writes something in her notebook and tells me that's actually very common in relationships where one person's needs dominate everything. She says part of our work together will be helping me rediscover who I am, separate from being David's wife. The idea sounds good but also scary, because what if I don't like who I am without him? What if being temporary was the most interesting thing about me? David's mother calls me 2 days later and asks if we can meet for coffee. I almost say no, but part of me needs to know if she was aware of any of David's planning. We agree to meet at a neutral cafe halfway between her house and where I'm staying with Saki. I get there first and order tea I don't really want, just to have something to hold. She arrives 10 minutes late, looking tired and older than I remember, and the moment she sits down she starts crying. She apologizes over and over, saying she should have said something sooner, and that she feels terrible about what happened at the dinner. I ask her what exactly she knew, and she takes a shaky breath before answering. She admits she knew David was still in love with Natalie, but she thought he would eventually get over it and learn to fully love me instead. She says she talked to him about it multiple times over the past 3 years, but he kept insisting he had everything under control, and that his feelings for Natalie were just nostalgia. She believed him because she wanted to believe him, because the alternative meant her son was capable of using someone for years while waiting for someone else to come back. Her apology sounds genuine, but it doesn't change anything because she still chose to stay quiet and let me live in a fake marriage. I ask her if she knew about the apartments with the connecting balconies and the secret savings account. She says no and looks genuinely horrified when I tell her about the wedding venue payments. She keeps saying she raised him better than this and that she doesn't understand how he could be so cruel. I watch her questioning everything she thought she knew about her son, and I almost feel sorry for her, except I'm too busy dealing with my own shattered illusions. She asks if there's anything she can do to help, and I tell her the truth, which is that I just need space from everyone connected to David right now. She nods and reaches across the table to squeeze my hand before leaving, and I sit there finishing my tea, wondering if any of David's family actually cared about me, or if I was just a role they needed filled temporarily. 2 weeks after the anniversary dinner, I meet Josephine Knight outside the first apartment she wants to show me. Saki recommended her and said she specializes in helping people find places they can actually afford on normal salaries. The building is older than what I'm used to, and the neighborhood isn't as nice as where David and I lived, but Josephine is cheerful and practical as she shows me through units. Most of them are smaller, with outdated kitchens and bathrooms that have seen better days. She keeps asking what matters most to me, and I keep saying I don't know, because I've never had to think about it before. David picked our rental house based on proximity to his office and whether it impressed his coworkers. After seeing 5 places that all blur together, I'm exhausted and ready to give up, but Josephine says she has one more I should see. The building is even older, with brick walls and creaky floors, but the moment I walk into the 1-bedroom unit, I feel something shift. The hardwood floors are worn but beautiful, and the windows are huge, letting in so much natural light the whole space feels peaceful. The kitchen is tiny and the bathroom has old tile, but something about the apartment feels right. Josephine shows me the building has good security and laundry in the basement, and the rent is exactly at the top of what I can afford on my salary alone. I stand in the empty living room looking out the windows at the street below and realize this could actually be mine. Not ours, not David's, just mine. I tell Josephine I want it, and we go back to her office to sign the lease. My hand shakes while I write my name and initial every page, but when it's done I feel scared and relieved at the same time. Moving into my own place happens faster than I expected. Saki helps me buy furniture from discount stores and secondhand shops, because I left almost everything at David's house and starting over costs more than I planned. We spend a Saturday building a bed frame and assembling a small dining table and hanging cheap curtains I picked out myself. Saki keeps asking what I like, and I keep having to stop and think about it because I genuinely don't remember my own preferences anymore. Do I like blue or green better? Do I want modern or traditional style? Do I prefer overhead lighting or lamps? Every tiny decision feels massive because it's the first time in years I'm choosing based only on what I want. By the end of the day, my new apartment looks like a home for just me, and I sit on my new couch feeling strange about the whole thing. 3 days after I move in, David shows up at Saki's loft looking for me. I'm not there, but Dominic answers the door and apparently David demands to know where I'm living now. Dominic tells him I'm not interested in talking, and David tries to push past him into the apartment. Dominic is bigger than David and he very calmly puts his hand on David's chest and suggests that trying to force his way in would be a serious mistake. David backs off but starts shouting that I'm being unreasonable and that we need to talk like adults. Dominic tells him the time for talking ended when he spent 3 years lying and planning to abandon his wife. David keeps yelling from the hallway about how I'm overreacting until a neighbor threatens to call the police. Saki texts me about the whole thing while it's happening, and I sit in my new apartment feeling grateful I didn't give David my address. 3 weeks after the anniversary dinner, I'm shopping for groceries when I run into Seung from David's office. We've met a few times at company events, but never really talked beyond polite small talk. He sees me in the produce section and his face goes weird like he's trying to decide whether to acknowledge me or pretend he didn't notice. I say hi first because ignoring each other seems more awkward, and he walks over looking uncomfortable. We chat about nothing for a minute before he mentions that it's nice Natalie finally made it back to Dallas and got settled into her new place. The words come out casual like he's discussing the weather, and then he sees my face and realizes I didn't know she was already here. He looks horrified and starts apologizing, saying he thought I knew, and he didn't mean to be the one to tell me. I tell him it's fine, even though it's not fine at all, and he hurries away, leaving his cart in the middle of the aisle. I stand there holding a bag of apples, thinking about how Natalie is here now, living in the apartment David set up for her 2 blocks from his office with the connecting balcony to his place, and my chest gets tight and I can't breathe properly. I drop my shopping bags and fumble for my phone with shaking hands. The parking lot spins around me and I can't get enough air into my lungs. Everything feels too tight and too bright, and I slide down against my car door until I'm sitting on the hot pavement. My phone rings 3 times before Saki picks up, and I can barely get words out to tell her what happened. She stays on the line with me for 20 minutes, talking me through breathing exercises, and reminding me that Natalie being in Dallas doesn't change anything about my worth or my decision to leave. David's choices have nothing to do with who I am as a person. I know she's right, but knowing something and feeling it are completely different things. By the time I can stand up again, my legs are wobbly, and I leave the groceries in the cart and drive straight back to my apartment. The next morning, I show up for my regular appointment with Kalani and spend the first 10 minutes just crying in her office. She hands me tissues and waits until I can talk before asking what triggered the panic attack. I tell her about running into David's coworker and learning that Natalie is already here living in the apartment David set up for her. Kalani says we need to work on separating my identity from my marriage, because right now I'm still defining myself through David's actions and choices. She gives me homework to make 2 lists. 1 list of things I liked before I met David, and 1 list of things I want to try now. I sit in her office staring at the blank paper for almost 5 minutes before I can write anything down. I used to like photography, but I stopped when David said it was a waste of money. I wanted to take cooking classes, but David preferred eating out. I enjoyed hiking, but David thought it was boring. Every item on my list comes with a memory of David dismissing it or talking me out of it. Kalani watches me struggle and says that's exactly the problem. I've spent 3 years molding myself around someone who was planning to leave me the whole time. She asks who I was before I became David's wife, and I realize I genuinely can't remember. That girl feels like someone from another life. 2 days later, I walk into a community center for a divorce support group that meets every Thursday evening. The room smells like old coffee, and there are about 15 people sitting in a circle of folding chairs. A woman named Kendall runs the group, and she welcomes me without making a big deal about it being my first time. Everyone introduces themselves with just their first name and how long they've been divorced or separated. Some people have been coming for months and others are brand new like me. A woman across the circle talks about how her husband left her for his high school girlfriend after 20 years of marriage and 3 kids. She found out because her teenage daughter saw them together at a restaurant. Listening to her story makes my 3 years with David feel less devastating somehow. Not because her pain is worse than mine, but because it reminds me that I'm not the only person who built a life with someone who was secretly waiting for someone else. After the meeting, several people come up to me and welcome me to the group. Kendall gives me her phone number and tells me to call if I need to talk between meetings. Walking back to my car, I feel less alone than I have in weeks. That night, I'm scrolling through Facebook when I see a message request from Lucas. My first instinct is to delete it without reading, but curiosity wins. He's written several paragraphs apologizing for what he said at the anniversary dinner. He claims he was drunk and angry at David for lying to everyone, and he took it out on me in the worst possible way. He says he's been feeling terrible about it for weeks, and he knows a Facebook message doesn't fix anything, but he wanted me to know he's genuinely sorry. At the end, he offers to testify in the divorce if I need someone to confirm David's intentions and the existence of the secret planning. I stare at the message for a long time before responding. I tell Lucas I don't need him to testify because I have enough evidence from David's own files, but I appreciate him finally being honest with me. I ask him why he decided to blow up David's secret at our anniversary dinner, instead of just telling me privately. He responds almost immediately saying he'd been drinking and watching David play the devoted husband all night, while texting Natalie under the table, and something in him just snapped. He admits the whole friend group knew about Natalie, and they all felt terrible watching David string me along, but nobody knew how to bring it up without destroying my life. I type back asking why none of them said anything sooner, and he takes 10 minutes to respond. When he does, he just says he doesn't have a good answer, and that they all convinced themselves it wasn't their place to interfere in David's marriage. He says he wishes now that someone had told me earlier before I wasted 3 years. I don't respond after that because there's nothing left to say. 4 weeks after the anniversary dinner, I'm making coffee in my new apartment when someone knocks on my door. I look through the peephole and see David standing in the hallway looking worse than I've ever seen him. He hasn't shaved in days and his shirt is wrinkled and he has dark circles under his eyes like he hasn't been sleeping. My first instinct is to pretend I'm not home, but he knocks again and calls my name through the door. Against every bit of common sense I have, I unlock the door but leave it open with my hand on the knob. He asks if we can talk, and I tell him we can talk right here in the doorway where my neighbors can hear everything. David steps inside, but I don't close the door or invite him further into my apartment. He looks around at my new furniture and the photos I hung on the walls, and something in his face shifts. He starts talking about Natalie and how coming back to Dallas hasn't been the reunion he imagined. He says she's changed and that maybe he made a mistake. I feel my whole body go cold, and I ask him if he's here because he wants me back, or because Natalie didn't want him. He opens his mouth and closes it and opens it again, and that hesitation tells me everything. David admits that Natalie has been distant and non-committal about their relationship since she moved into the apartment he found for her. She likes the place and she's grateful for his help, but she's been going on dates with other people and treating him like a helpful friend, rather than her soulmate. He looks genuinely confused, like he can't understand why his perfect plan isn't working out the way he spent 4 years imagining. He says he thought they would pick up where they left off, but she keeps saying she needs time to settle in and adjust to being back in Dallas. I watch him struggle to explain why the woman he destroyed his marriage for doesn't actually want him, and I feel nothing. No satisfaction and no sympathy. Just emptiness where my feelings for him used to be. I tell David that I'm not his backup plan, and I'm not going to wait around while he figures out whether Natalie wants him or not. He tries to argue that our marriage was real, and that he did care about me even if I wasn't the one. He reaches for my hand, but I pull away and tell him to leave. He stands in my doorway for what feels like forever, just looking at me like he's waiting for me to change my mind. Finally, he turns and walks down the hallway, and I close the door and lock it and lean against it until I hear the elevator doors close. That night, I cry harder than I have since the anniversary dinner, but it feels different this time. I'm not crying because I want David back, or because I miss what we had. I'm crying for the 3 years I spent loving someone who was always looking past me at someone else. I'm crying for the girl I was who thought being a good wife would be enough to make him stay. I'm crying because even though I know leaving was the right choice, it still hurts to realize that the man I married never really saw me as anything more than a placeholder. Saki calls to check on me, and I tell her about David showing up and what he said about Natalie. She asks if I'm okay, and I tell her the truth, which is that I don't know yet, but I will be eventually. After we hang up, I sit on my couch in the dark and let myself feel everything until there's nothing left but exhaustion and the quiet knowledge that I made the right choice, even though it cost me everything I thought I wanted. The mediation office had gray walls and uncomfortable chairs that made my back hurt after the first hour. David sat across from me with his lawyer, a woman in a sharp suit who kept shuffling papers and looking annoyed that we were even there. Miles sat next to me with his briefcase open, and a calm expression that never changed no matter what David's lawyer said. She started by claiming I deserved almost nothing because David earned most of the income during our marriage, and I'd only contributed a small portion to our joint finances. She said I should be grateful for whatever David was willing to offer out of kindness. Miles let her finish talking, and then opened his briefcase and pulled out printed bank statements showing David's secret account with $40,000 that he'd been hiding from me. He laid out the emails between David and Natalie about ring shopping and apartment hunting. He showed the lease agreements for both apartments with connecting balconies and the receipts for the wedding venue payments David had been making for 4 years. David's lawyer stopped shuffling papers and actually read what Miles put in front of her. Her whole attitude changed, and she asked for a recess to talk to David privately. They left the room, and Miles poured me water from the pitcher on the table and told me this was going better than he expected. When they came back, David looked pale and angry, but he didn't make eye contact with me. His lawyer suggested we discuss a settlement that would be fair to both parties, which was very different from her earlier position that I deserved nothing. We spent 3 more hours going through our assets and debts. I got half of our joint savings, which was about $15,000, my car, which was paid off, and a portion of David's retirement account that would give me some security. It wasn't as much as Miles said I could get if we went to court, but I didn't want to drag this out for months. I wanted to be done with David and move on with my life. David had to sign multiple documents, and he did it without saying a word to me. I watched him write his signature over and over and felt absolutely nothing. No sadness or anger or relief, just emptiness where my feelings for him used to be. My apartment became mine in ways that had nothing to do with whose name was on the lease. I started eating breakfast standing at the kitchen counter instead of sitting at a proper table like David always insisted. I watched reality shows he said were trash, and true crime documentaries he claimed gave him nightmares. I left my coffee mug in the sink overnight instead of washing it immediately. I bought throw pillows in colors he would have hated, and hung curtains that didn't match anything. Small choices that were entirely mine felt bigger than they should have. I could eat cereal for dinner or stay up until 2 a.m. reading or leave my shoes by the front door instead of in the closet. Nobody cared about my habits or told me I was doing things wrong. The freedom was strange and wonderful and sometimes lonely, but it was mine. Kaylani asked me during our next session if I thought I could trust someone enough to be in a relationship again. I told her honestly that I couldn't imagine letting anyone that close right now. The idea of sharing my space and my life with someone who might be secretly planning to leave me made my chest tight. She nodded and said that was completely normal and that I shouldn't rush myself. She explained that healing doesn't happen in a straight line. Some days I'd feel strong and capable, and other days I'd feel broken and lost, and both reactions were okay. She said I needed to give myself permission to feel whatever came up without judging myself for not being over it fast enough. I appreciated that she didn't try to give me a timeline or tell me I'd feel better soon. She just acknowledged that this was hard and that it would take as long as it took. 6 weeks after the anniversary dinner, I went back to work full-time. My coworkers welcomed me back without making a big deal about my absence. Saki brought me coffee every morning in my favorite mug and checked in with quick texts throughout the day without being obvious about it. People asked how I was doing, but they didn't push when I gave short answers. Having somewhere to go every day and tasks to focus on helped more than I expected. Work gave me structure and purpose when everything else in my life felt uncertain. I threw myself into projects and volunteered for extra assignments because staying busy kept me from thinking too much about David and Natalie and what they might be doing now that she was back in Dallas. I was having dinner with my sister at a restaurant downtown when I saw David sitting alone at a table near the window. He looked startled when he noticed me, and I felt my whole body tense up. My sister saw him too and squeezed my hand under the table. He stood up like he might come over, but I looked away and focused on my menu. When the waiter came to take our order, I introduced David to my sister as my ex-husband, which was the first time I'd said those words out loud. They felt strange in my mouth, but also right. He wasn't my husband anymore. He was someone I used to be married to, and that was a completely different thing. David sat back down at his table and didn't try to approach us again. After I went to the bathroom, my sister told me that David had tried to come over to our table, but she'd stopped him. She said she told him to leave me alone and let me enjoy my dinner in peace. She said he looked like he wanted to say something important, but couldn't find the right words. I was grateful I didn't have to deal with whatever speech he was preparing. I didn't want to hear his excuses or explanations or apologies. I just wanted to eat dinner with my sister and not think about him at all. 7 weeks after everything fell apart, David's mother called and asked if we could have dinner one last time. I almost said no, but something in her voice made me agree. We met at a quiet restaurant on the other side of town where we wouldn't run into anyone we knew. She looked older than I remembered, and tired in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. She told me David and Natalie weren't together. Natalie was actually dating someone she met at her new office, and she'd made it clear to David that she wasn't interested in rekindling their relationship. David apparently didn't take the news well, and had been calling his mother constantly looking for sympathy she wasn't willing to give. David's mother said she told him he destroyed a good marriage chasing a fantasy, and now he had to live with the consequences. She said she should have spoken up sooner and told him to appreciate what he had, instead of pining for what he lost. She apologized again for not defending me at the anniversary dinner, and for not calling David out on his behavior over the past 3 years. She said she hoped I would find someone who appreciated me, and treated me like I deserved to be treated. We hugged goodbye in the parking lot, and I felt closure with at least one member of David's family. She wasn't responsible for David's choices, but her acknowledgement that he was wrong meant something. The divorce papers arrived in the mail 8 weeks after the anniversary dinner that destroyed my marriage. I sat on my couch holding the envelope for a long time before I opened it. The official documents said I was no longer married to David. I was no longer Jennifer, who was married to David. I was just Jennifer, and I needed to figure out who that was. I picked a Thursday evening for the dinner because that's what we'd done 3 years ago. Same restaurant, different table, completely different meaning. Saki arrived first and saved us a spot near the windows where we could see the street. Dominic showed up right behind her carrying a bottle of champagne he'd picked out himself. My sister came last, rushing in from work still wearing her court clothes because she'd been in depositions all afternoon. The hostess led us to our table, and I noticed we were sitting 3 tables away from where the anniversary dinner had happened. I could see the exact spot where Lucas had made his toast, and where David had kept cutting his steak like nothing was wrong. Saki saw me looking and reached across to squeeze my hand. Dominic poured the champagne, and I told them this was my anti-anniversary, my celebration of being free. We raised our glasses, and my sister said, "Here's to Jennifer, who isn't temporary or secondary or anyone's backup plan anymore." The champagne tasted better than any wine I'd ordered for David. We ordered food we actually wanted instead of what looked impressive or what David preferred. I got the pasta I'd always liked but never ordered because David said it was too messy. My sister got the steak, but she cut it into small pieces and actually enjoyed it instead of using it as a prop. Saki ordered 3 appetizers because she wanted to try everything, and Dominic didn't complain about the cost. We talked about normal things like Saki's promotion at work, and my sister's new apartment, and Dominic's terrible golf game. Nobody mentioned David unless I brought him up, and even then they just listened without trying to fix anything. The waiter brought our food, and I realized I was actually hungry, not just pushing food around my plate to be polite. We stayed for 2 hours talking and laughing, and I felt more like myself than I had in months. Kehlani's office had big windows that let in afternoon light and plants on every surface. I'd been seeing her for 8 weeks now, and the sessions had become something I actually looked forward to instead of dreading. She asked me what I wanted to talk about today, and I told her I'd been thinking about what comes next. The divorce was final, I had my own apartment, I'd separated all my finances from David. But I didn't know what to do with all this freedom I suddenly had. Kehlani leaned back in her chair and asked what I meant by that. I explained that for 3 years I'd made decisions based on what fit into David's life, his schedule, his preferences. I'd stopped taking classes because he said they were expensive. I'd stopped seeing certain friends because he didn't like them. I'd stopped doing hobbies because they took time away from being available for him. Now I could do whatever I wanted, but I'd forgotten what I actually wanted to do. Kehlani asked if there was anything I'd been curious about or interested in before I met David. I thought about it and remembered I used to love taking photos, just random shots of things I found interesting. David had always said buying a good camera was a waste of money when phones took decent pictures, but I'd wanted to take a real photography class and learn how to actually use professional equipment. Kehlani asked what was stopping me now, and I opened my mouth to list reasons but then stopped. Nothing was stopping me. I had my own money that I could spend however I wanted. I had my own time that wasn't scheduled around someone else's needs. I could take a photography class or any other class and nobody could tell me it was stupid or wasteful. Kehlani smiled and said, "That's exactly right." I was free to make choices based on what I wanted, instead of what fit into someone else's plans for my life. The community college had a continuing education photography course that met Tuesday and Thursday evenings. I signed up online and paid the fee without asking anyone's permission or justifying the expense. The first class was in a building I'd never been to before, a newer facility with big studios and equipment rooms. I showed up 15 minutes early because I was nervous and didn't want to walk in late. The instructor was a woman in her 50s who introduced herself and told us to grab any seat. I picked one near the middle where I wouldn't be too visible but could still see the board. Other students filtered in, and I realized most of them were older than me, people taking classes for fun or career changes. Nobody knew me or knew about David or knew anything except that I was here to learn photography. The instructor started by asking why we'd signed up, and people gave different answers. Some wanted to take better family photos. Some were interested in starting photography businesses. When it was my turn, I said I'd always been curious about it, and finally had time to take the class. That was true enough without being the whole truth about how I was rebuilding my life from nothing. We spent the first class learning about camera basics and different types of photography. The instructor showed us examples of portrait work and landscape shots and street photography. She gave us an assignment to take 20 photos of things that interested us and bring them to the next class. We could use any camera we had, including our phones. I left feeling excited about the assignment, already thinking about what I wanted to photograph. I sat at my kitchen counter 3 months after the anniversary dinner that had destroyed my marriage. My coffee was getting cold while I looked through the photos on my laptop from my latest class assignment. They weren't perfect, and some were badly composed and the lighting was off in a few, but they were mine. I'd taken them because I wanted to, not because someone told me to, or because they fit into someone else's vision. There was a photo of the sunrise from my apartment window, one of Saki laughing at something Dominic said, several of random objects I'd found interesting like a rusted bike chain or raindrops on a leaf. The instructor had said I had a good eye for finding beauty in ordinary things. I thought about Lucas calling me the temporary one in front of 12 people. It had been the worst moment of my life, but also maybe the best thing that could have happened. If he hadn't said it, I might have stayed married to David for years, always wondering why I felt like something was missing, never knowing I was just a placeholder until someone better came along. Now I was building a life where I wasn't temporary or secondary. I wasn't waiting for someone to decide I was good enough, or comparing myself to whoever came before me. I was just Jennifer, and that was enough.